So this is it, my final speech. And what else would I be talking about other than stupidity, of course? Um, but I'll admit, I really don't want to give this speech, and even though I could have easily given it about, literally anything else, I'm still going to be doing it about, this topic anyway, because I think that maybe you can learn something from my mistakes. And so that's why I'm going to be taking the speech much more seriously than I normally would. And that's why I won't be, building up to any point in the speech where I'm gonna fake you out and instead talk about like cookies versus cake or something. Um, I'm not gonna be doing that this time. And if anything should solidify your conviction that I'm being truly genuine, it should be that. So I want to talk to you about the thing that scares me the most, the thing that's constantly on my mind and really motivates a lot of my decisions. And I fear that the gravity of this topic isn't going to be adequately conveyed in a 5-minute speech, but I feel like I need to tell you about it anyway. So, in addition to that, and to sort of make my speech career come full circle, I'm going to make good use of already existing context, and I'm going to be incorporating the themes and premises of my past speeches in order to address what I want to talk about in this speech. So, if you remember back to my first speech, I gave an analogy about a story of me losing my phone, and I compared it to uh, the story of someone like losing their life, right? And so the point of that speech, or the theme of that speech that I wanted to get at, was that you can't let one thing define your identity, because if you do, and then that thing suddenly disappears, then there's going to be nothing left of you. So we can say the theme of this is something like, don't ground your identity in any one thing, lest it change and you be lost. And I built upon this premise during my original PowerPoint speech, where I talked about how people were paradoxes, and how no list of character traits, interests, or experiences, no matter how complex or accurate you could ever make it, it could never define you, because like all people, you are a living paradox, and you are always changing and undefinable, yet you're always necessarily going to be yourself. So to truly understand the significance of that point, we have to understand that you're not only something that changes, you're something that has no choice but to change, right? Because we really don't have that much of a say in the matter. We have no more control over what we become than what we find convincing, or our life circumstances, or our family. So unconcerned with what we really want, people are always going to become the product of their environment. And all of this is to say that you are going to change. And when you do, that person you become is still going to be you whether you like it or not. And this is important because if you block yourself off from internal critique and leave your internal perspectives to the whims of your environment, and you're not constantly engaging in introspection to ensure that your beliefs correspond with reality, you might just find yourself waking up one day as a person that you barely recognize, with potentially life-altering beliefs that you might only find out later are just not evidently true. But while this is inevitable, there are things that we can do about it, and that is something that I wanted to touch upon in my note card speech. And while that speech was about, why murder was wrong, it was also meant to demonstrate that we all have beliefs that we accept, but we don't truly consider their rational justifications. And usually these are a lot of the same beliefs that we don't want to be proven wrong about. And so we can say that the theme of this speech is something like, we tend not to genuinely consider justifications for fundamentally or emotionally charged, or fundamental or emotionally charged beliefs. And that can be really scary because these are the beliefs that are going to be most influential in our decision making, but they're the ones that are usually subject to the least amount of scrutiny. But what was the one thing that all of my speeches had in common? What was the one point that I consistently wanted to get across? And what was the one thing that I constantly told you to remember? That stupidity is a choice. But what does that really mean? And more importantly, how does that concept unite all of these themes together? In my speech about Socrates' apology, I think I painted a pretty clear picture about what I mean, although in not so few words. What I meant to get across is that stupidity is a choice because it's not based on your intelligence level, or your knowledge, or your social status, or your age, or any other factors like that. Stupidity is a choice because it's not something that you are, it's something that you have to decide to become. So, and stupidity in my definition is the lack of intellectual honesty, it's intellectual cowardice, it's the rejection of the Socratic method, it's philosophical complacency, anti-rationalism, and closed-minded arrogance. So in this speech, I not only wanted to convey why stupidity is a choice, but also demonstrate why it's so dangerous. So if we take a look at all of the themes that we've covered in this speech so far, we'll be left with these three things. And if we were to restate these in a syllogistic form, we'd be left with something like this. So, premise 1, we ought not ground our identity in any one thing or set of ideologies. Premise 2, it is inevitable that you will change and adopt beliefs directly associated with your experiences and influences. Premise 3, beliefs contingent on and directly associated with your experiences and influences are under no obligation to be correspondent with reality. And premise 4, we often do not consider ideologically fundamental or socially convenient beliefs to be worthy of serious contemplation. Now, in our conclusion, I think we can really easily identify the problem here, because this is making a prescriptive statement with premise 1. It's saying we ought not dogmatically hold any set of ideologies, because there's no guarantee nor a high likelihood that the beliefs that we hold are correspondent with reality, and we should be especially concerned with evaluating socially convenient or ideologically fundamental beliefs, considering that they are inherently more likely to be subject to less scrutiny and distorted by unconscious bias. And that's a really big deal, because who are we to say that our beliefs are correspondent with reality, if not, referencing them with other perspectives, if we're not constantly holding them to a standard of intellectual scrutiny. So yeah, and who's really to say that 10 years down the road, if we're not constantly doing this, that we might discover that all of the beliefs that we used to have were just completely wrong. And that's why this is so scary to me, because that situation is something that's a direct result of my definition of stupidity. If you don't hold yourself to philosophical philosophically rigorous standards, and if you allow yourself to fall into intellectual dishonesty and anti-rationalism and closed-mindedness, then there's no telling how divorced your actual beliefs are going to be from reality. So why does this matter so much to me? And if you remember, we had a conversation a while ago in Bible class when Pastor Marks was gone, and it was just us and Senator McBivens, and he essentially asked us the question, like, what would you say to someone that you're trying to evangelize to that was an atheist and they just lacked a belief in God or something like that, and you wanted to share with them like the reasons why you believed or what you think might convince them? And so it seems to me that all of these things that I'm going to put up on the screen that I took notes on when you said them, and it seems to me that all of these things should at least be the most convincing, or actually better than any reasons that you that are actually convincing to you. And so let's just go over what you said. You said the argument from teleology, the argument from specified complexity, the argument from personal incredulity, the argument from miracles, and within the context of that conversation, you also said some other things about you wanted to make sure that you clarified your theology. You wanted to compare the Christian narrative to the modern narrative. You wanted to be more relational. You wanted to emphasize personal knowledge than facts and knowledge. You wanted to ask them why they didn't believe in a God, and if that was a deeply held belief. You wanted to share your personal testimony, and that was something that was agreed that would be one of the best things that you could do. And so I see this as being really problematic, because I personally looked into all of these things, and coming out of it, I found all of them to be unconvincing. And I know that if that can happen to me, then it can happen to you. And that's a really huge problem, because if you're grounding your belief in God, or your belief in anything, in a set of beliefs like this, and you're not constantly holding it to a high level of scrutiny, then when you actually do that, when you compare it to other perspectives, and let's say you're like me and you find them to be unconvincing, but that's what you grounded your identity in, then what are you going to become when they disappear? So that's about it. That's just sort of a question that I wanted to ask, and the point that I wanted to get across. So remember, stupidity is a choice. You should know that by now. So don't be stupid.